What's up, guys? Justin here, back with a new show, a new video. It's not a top 10, it's not a countdown. I'm going to just talk about some of the worst wrestling matches I've ever seen. Some of the absolute worst of the worst from territories, from WWF, WCW in the late 80s, early 90s, even in the Attitude Era. God, and even, some of the worst matches I've ever seen. So here we go, let's start. First, let's talk about the fucking ding-dongs. I'm not making a joke. I'm not talking about the dessert or what, chocolate candy ding-dongs. I'm not talking about that. God, this is so bad. If you're going to name wrestlers or a tag team the ding-dongs, you should expect them to have god-awful matches. Some of the worst matches I've ever seen. The ding-dongs had some really bad matches. So ding-dongs were a short-lived team, the ding-dongs. I guess the concept of the ding-dongs came from this fucking idiot, Jim Herd. Who knew? Such a dumbass. The guy was a former Pizza Hut executive or something, or president of a Pizza Hut restaurant. And I don't know who hired him. Ted Turner? Who hired him? Someone thought Mr. Pizza Man, Jim Herd, could run WCW. Well, he ran him into the ground. Had some god-awful gimmicks in WCW in 89 and 1990. Some really bad shit. So yeah, Jim Herd. By the way, the ding-dongs, you want a short history of them? I don't, but I'll give it to you anyway. The ding-dongs were, I guess, an independent tag team from the South. They were the Rock and Roll Rebels. That's according to Pro Wrestling Wikipedia. So yeah, they were basically a rip-off on the indies of the Rock and Roll Express or the Rockers. And the concept of the ding-dongs came from Jim Herd. Again, one of the worst matches I've ever seen. The Ding-Dongs had a Clash of Champions in 1989. I think it was Clash of Champions 7 or 8. I think it was in, June or July 89. Anyways, the Ding-Dongs were in a tag. It was god-awful. It was one of the worst matches ever. It was so bad. Jim Ross on commentary was like absolutely bashing it during the match. He was like, "What the hell is this?" It's like, I guess that's Ding Dong 1, that's Ding Dong 2, so I guess I'll call him Ding and the other one Dong. He was like making all these jokes. He was probably embarrassed. And then at the end of the match, the finish, Jim Ross was like, "God, that was awful. That was god-awful." He actually said that. He was like, "Geez, that was awful." Good God. So, yeah, ding-dongs were short-lived. They were at a Clash of Champions and I think another event. I forget which event. So again, Jim Herd is the same dumbass that thought he should turn Ric Flair into getting rid of the Nature Boy and turn him into Spartacus. A Spartacus gimmick for Ric Flair, which he was established. Nature Boy wasn't even a character. Ric Flair, again, Ric Flair the Nature Boy. He was already established for like well over 12 years or more as the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And Jim Herd, his dumbass, wanted to call Ric Flair Spartacus. So according to Jim Cornette, he explained, and Jim Cornette was no fan of Jim Herd. He explained Jim Herd's concept for the Ding Dongs. He said Jim Herd thought, let's have a tag team with bells on their neck, bells on their ankles, stupid little bells you shake. Like what the hell? Like a cat. Bring a cat in the ring, it would have started playing with the Ding Dongs. And jumping on them probably. It was embarrassing. Little bells. That's not a good gimmick. To put little bells on your gear. Good God. That's horrible. So he thought putting bells on their neck and ankles, bells everywhere. We'll have them come out with a big bell. This is Jim Cornette trying to explain it. And whenever one of them gets beat up, the other one will ring the bell in the corner to get fired up. The kids will love it. No, the kids hated it. And the adults were embarrassed and thought it was shit. The adult fans in the crowd were booing them. Good God, yeah, they worked on a Clash of Champions. So Jim Herd, I guess, was surprised the fans rejected the Ding Dongs. Again, Jim Herd, you're a fucking idiot. So, here we go with more of the worst matches ever. Lex Luger, it was his rookie year, I believe. He might have been a rookie. It might have been Lex Luger's first matchup. I'm not sure. Against Bruiser Brody. Lex Luger, Bruiser Brody in a steel cage in Florida. Might have been Florida Championship Wrestling. I'm not sure. But I used to have the match on DVD. It was god-awful. Watch it, find it. Lex Luger, Bruiser Brody in a cage. Bruiser Brody refused to sell. He refused to sell for Lex. He must have not liked him for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe he thought Lex was getting a push because he had a great body and he didn't deserve it. I don't know. But Lex Luger, Bruiser Brody, I'm not sure the year, but let me check here. Let me ask on my phone. When was Lex Luger Bruiser Brody?
The infamous steel cage match between Lex Luger and Bruiser Brody in Championship Wrestling from Florida took place on January 21st, 1987.
So there it is. AI answered it. I had no clue it was in 87. So it was before Lex was in the NWA and debuted in the NWA and joined the Horsemen. It was before that. January 21st, 87. So that's the cage match. It was one of the worst matches I've seen. One of the worst cage matches also. Lex Luger, Bruiser Brody, January 21st, 87. Check it out. Look for it on YouTube. Other really god-awful matches. Just really embarrassing shit. On an episode of Thunder. Late 1999. Oklahoma, or early 2000, I should ask. My phone again. Oklahoma against Medusa. On an episode of WCW Thunder. It was so bad. It was so embarrassing. It was a disgrace. I hated the Oklahoma character. It was embarrassing. It pissed me off. It was a slap in the face to JR. It was total disrespect for Jim Ross. And Ed Ferrara, Oklahoma sucked. Your character, you as Oklahoma, absolutely sucked. You brought nothing to wrestling your whole life. You were a writer during the Attitude Era. I don't care. There's a ton of writers that have been in wrestling, Ed Ferrara, and you were one of the worst at it. Because you thought you should put yourself on TV and become a wrestling character. You looked like shit. You were a fat guy with absolutely no athletic ability at all. A cat, a dog, a bird, a hamster, a parakeet. They all have more athletic ability than Ed Ferrara had. A fucking worm, an ant could move better than Ed Ferrara in the ring as Oklahoma. He was shit. He was an embarrassment to pro wrestling. He made me embarrassed. When I would see him come out on WCW, I was embarrassed and it pissed me off. It made me want to turn the channel. Not even support WCW at all. Again, Ed Ferrara, you're a piece of shit. If I ever saw you, I would punch you in the face for making fun of JR. And Vince Russo, you also went along with it. So shame on you, both of you. You knew JR was battling Bell's palsy. You knew he was sick. And you still didn't give a fuck. You just thought, what the hell was the point of Oklahoma? The character. What was the point of it? Absolutely nothing. It brought nothing to wrestling. It brought nothing to WCW. Didn't help you in the ratings. It sucked. So Oklahoma Medusa on episode of Thunder. One of the worst matches I've ever seen. Not Medusa's fault. She was in there with a sack of shit. She couldn't even pull a good match out of him. Nobody could put on a good match with Ed Ferrara. Vince McMahon. Mr. McMahon was a better wrestler than Oklahoma. And Mr. McMahon was not good in the ring. When did Oklahoma versus Medusa take place?
The key match between Oklahoma and Medusa, also known as Medusa, for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship, took place at the pay-per-view event. WCW Sold Out 2000 on January 16, 2000. The rivalry also included a farcical evening gown match on an episode of WCW Thunder on January 12, 2000, which Medusa won.
Absolutely embarrassing. Oklahoma put himself in a pay-per-view match. That's also one of the worst matches I've ever seen. Oklahoma at Sold Out 2000. And him on Thunder. So he's in two of the worst matches I've ever seen. Jeez. He was god-awful. So let's talk about some more. Sid, I love Sid. I was a big fan of Sid. Always was since the first time I saw him. In probably 1990 or 89 I saw him on TV, I believe, or 91 maybe. Because I didn't have cable much as a kid. I only had cable for a short time in 1989, and then we had to get rid of it because we couldn't afford it. My mom was a single mom. But yeah, I might have saw Sid in 89. If not, then I definitely saw him in 1991 on probably WCW Worldwide. But as a kid, I will admit, I didn't see much NWA or WCW. I did way later. When I was a teenager, I rented a ton of NWA pay-per-views. NWA shows. Pay-per-views mostly. So that's how I saw WCW and the NWA later, is from videotapes. As a kid growing up, I mostly watched and only got to see WWF a lot. A ton. I watched WWF mostly because I couldn't get WCW much. I didn't know when it was on the weekend. But Sid, I love him. Rest in peace, Sid. You were part of one of the worst matches in 1991, Sid Elegante at Super Brawl 91. It was so bad. Good God. Not Sid's fault, but it was so bad. Sid did not work well with Elegante, and Elegante never had a good match with anybody. May he rest in peace also. So, now I'm going to get to something fun. And I'm going to agree with the list. A lot of the list of some of the worst matches in WCW history. There will be a part 2. I'm going to do a part 2 also because there's so many worst, bad matches I've seen. I have to get them off my chest. In the future, next show, part 2, I'll talk about some of the worst matches. A ton of them were from XPW, and a ton of these DVDs. This is a 3PW indie show. I don't think there was a bad match on this show, but maybe there was. God, this show had, like, every match sucked and was one of the worst. Baptized in Blood 3 had some really bad matches, and the arena setup was shit. They were in a dirt ring. Looked like a bull ring with dirt around it. The ring was surrounded by outside dirt. What the fuck? Couldn't put down a tarp or mats. It was embarrassing. Looked like one of the cheapest setups for a wrestling show that had a DVD deal. And somehow, yeah, XPW had money. They had that porno money coming in. And you couldn't go to a better setup for a show. God, XPW, you were cheap. You looked really cheap. Your TV and your DVD shows, a lot of them looked super cheap. Super, super cheap. Poorly booked and poorly... you picked poor arenas that looked like shit and run down. Some think the ECW arena was bad and looked like shit in the 90s. Not compared to where XPW ran. The ECW arena was like a fucking resort compared to where XPW would run in California. So here we go. I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to ask AI some of the worst matches in WCW history. What are some of the worst matches in WCW history?
WCW had many great matches, but especially in its later years, 1998 to 2001, it became notorious for poorly executed and convoluted bouts. Here are some of the most frequently cited worst matches or main events in WCW history, often due to poor booking, odd gimmicks, or low-quality in-ring action. Infamous or controversial main events. Hulk Hogan vs. The Warrior, Halloween Havoc 1998.
Absolutely.
Reason for Hate, a disastrous rematch of their WrestleMania 6 classic. It was plagued by poor pacing, multiple screw-ups, like a malfunctioning fireball, and a complicated finish involving a magic mirror and Hogan's nephew. It's often called one of the worst pay-per-view main events ever. Doomsday Cage Match, uncensored 1996. Wrestlers Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage versus the Alliance to End Hulkamania. Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Meng the Barbarian, Lex Luger, The Ultimate Solution, and Kevin Sullivan.
Doomsday at Uncensored 96 is one of the worst.
Cage structure that was almost impossible to follow. The action was slow and confusing, featuring things like Hogan using a frying pan. Hulk Hogan versus Jeff Jarrett, Bash at the Beach 2000.
Absolutely.
Reason for Hate. This wasn't a bad match for in-ring quality.
Hogan
A
Jarrett.
disastrous, unscripted moment of backstage politics. Jeff Jarrett laid down for Hogan in a planned work-shoot angle that went awry, leading to a legitimate fallout between Hogan and head booker Vince Russo, and Hogan walking out of the company. Hulk Hogan vs. Sting, Starrcade 1997. Reason for hate. The match itself was solid, but the finish was notoriously overbooked and convoluted. It was the culmination of a year-long storyline, but WCW complicated the finish with a fast count by the referee, Nick Patrick, and an unnecessarily long post-match segment involving Bret Hart that confused and deflated the audience. The War Games match, Fall Brawl 1998. Reason for hate. The legendary War Games structure was used for an elimination match, which went against the established rules of the match. The elimination format diminished the usual chaotic violence and intensity of the match. Other poorly received matches, Oklahoma vs. Medusa/Medusa, sold out 2000. Reason for hate. Oklahoma, Ed Ferrara's controversial parody of Jim Ross, defeated Medusa for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship.
Embarrassing.
This was seen as a final insult to the title, and an example of the promotion prioritizing insulting humor over wrestling credibility.
Embarrassing.
David Arquette's matches, 2000.
Yeah, David Arquette,
Any
too.
match involving the actor David Arquette after he controversially won the WCW
That's
World Heavyweight
embarrassing.
Championship was heavily panned for devaluing the company's top prize. Ric Flair vs. David Flair vs. Sting vs. Hulk Hogan, uncensored 2000. Reason for hate. A confusing and overbooked four-way match featuring a returning Flair, his son, and multiple run-ins, typical of the chaotic booking in WCW's final year.
So there are some of the AI's worst matches in WCW history. I agree with that list that AI said. I agree with all of it. Ric Flair vs. David, Flair vs. Sting vs. Hogan, uncensored 2000. I don't remember that as a four-way. I don't remember that as an actual fatal four-way. But it probably happened. David Arquette winning the title on Thunder was embarrassing. He pinned Bischoff. That was one of the worst matches I've ever seen. Also, David Arquette at Slamboree 2000 against DDP Jeff Jarrett. That was one of the worst matches. Anything with Oklahoma. I agree with Fall Brawl 98. Sting and Hogan, Starrcade 97, I agree with also. Jeez, it's warm in here. Yeah, Jeff Jarrett Hogan, Bash at the Beach. It wasn't a match, but geez, it was one of the worst matches I've ever seen. Doomsday Cage in 96. As a kid, I liked it, but I was 12. As an adult, I just laugh at it when I watch it back. It's pretty entertaining to me. Hogan and the Warrior, Halloween Havoc, 96. Be all for Hogan to get his win back from the Warrior. It was an embarrassment. It was a horrible matchup. One of the worst I've ever seen. Hogan Warrior. Halloween Havoc, 98. Halloween Havoc, 98 was such a mess because they ran out of pay-per-view time and the main event got cut off. DDP Goldberg got cut off and went too long. Whatever idiot paced the time of the show, they should have been fired for fucking up. I don't know, pasted Bischoff or somebody. So, God, yeah. You want more worst matches? I'll give you one from the Attitude Era. One of the worst matches I've ever seen. Yeah, I got a pop. Mr. McMahon, Vince McMahon, well, he was a babyface, so I guess he wasn't Mr. McMahon, but Vince, on SmackDown, Vince defeated Triple H for the WWF Championship on an episode of SmackDown. Vince actually won the world title. Now, the run-in didn't bother me. It made sense. Stone Cold interfered to cost Triple H. That makes sense. But still, it was one of the worst matches I've ever seen. The entire match, Vince just got the shit beat out of him. And he was not any good at selling. Really, ass kicking. He was never good at it. All he would always do is blade and just bleed. That's all Vince would do for his opponents. Blade. Really, that's all he could do. So let me look up for a minute before I go, and there will be a part 2 of worst matches I've ever seen. WCW Uncensored 2000.
WCW Uncensored 2000 was a professional wrestling pay-per-view, PPV event produced by World Championship Wrestling, WCW, on March 19, 2000 at the American Airlines Arena in Miami, Florida. It is generally regarded as one of the low points in WCW's history, featuring strange booking and controversial gimmick matches. Key matches and results. The event featured a double main event. Hulk Hogan defeated Ric Flair in a Yapapee Indian strap match. This was the culmination of a long-running feud between the two legends. Sid Vicious C.
Again, what the fuck? That's one of the worst matches also. Hogan against Ric Flair in the year 2000. March at Uncensored on a pay-per-view. Both guys were like, geez, Flair had to be 51 or 50. Hogan, I don't know, it was like 49 or maybe 50. I'm not sure. But good God, we're talking 25 years ago. Uncensored, over 25 years ago was Uncensored 2000. And so if Hogan, yeah, he just passed away this year. He's 71, I think, or 70 or 71. Gonna be 71, I'm not sure. But, so 25 years ago, minus 70. So Hogan was 55? No, he couldn't have been 55. I'm having trouble. 45? I'm not sure. But whatever. Look it up, how old Hogan was in the year 2000. He was old. Flair was old. They shouldn't have been on pay-per-view and a stupid gimmick. What the fuck was that? A yappa something? Yappy? Slappy? I don't know what the fuck that was. Something strap match. Horrible. Horrible name for a strap match. I don't know what the fuck that meant, but it was a horrible match. One of the worst I've ever seen. God, WCW. Late 99. In the fall of 99. Into the most of 2000, they were shit. They had some of the worst matches ever. I'll give you another one. Hulk Hogan and Sting. That's another one of the worst matches I've ever seen. Hulk Hogan Sting from Halloween Havoc 99. What the fuck was that finish? What was it? I don't get it. Why'd Hogan lay down? To confuse the fans? To me, that made no fucking sense, and it was stupid, and it was a ripoff, and if I would have ordered it, I would have asked for my money back from the cable company. I would say, I want my fucking refund for that finish. Let me look that up, by the way. See what AI says. Let's see what AI will say about Hogan Sting at Halloween Havoc 99. Hulk Hogan versus Sting Halloween Havoc 99.
The match between Hulk Hogan and Sting for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship at Halloween Havoc 1999 is notorious for being one of the most absurd and shortest main events in the company's history. The match result was Sting defeated Hulk Hogan in 3 seconds. The infamous laydown finish. What happened was a quintessential example of WCW's chaotic booking and reliance on confusing worked shoot angles in that era. Under Vince Russo's initial creative tenure, 1. Hogan's entrance. Hogan's music played, but he did not come out. Sting's music then played, and the champion came to the ring. 2. The laydown Hogan's music played a second time, and he finally appeared, dressed in street clothes rather than his wrestling
I'm
gear.
confused
Straight into the
by
ring,
just
whispered something
listening to
Sting,
this
and then immediately lay down on
description.
the mat. 3. The pin Sting simply covered Hogan, and the referee counted the pinfall, ending the match in a matter of seconds. The aftermath. The entire segment was a way to write Hogan off of television for a planned storyline break. It was intended to suggest that Hogan was so fed up with the politics of the company that he refused to wrestle, essentially throwing a tantrum by refusing to lose a match in a traditional manner. However, the event immediately devolved further. The WCW World Heavyweight Championship was now held by the heel Sting. Later in the night, Sting issued an open challenge which was answered by Goldberg. In their unsanctioned, unscheduled match, Goldberg defeated Sting. A referee then handed the title to Goldberg and announced him as the new WCW World.
So that was Russo's idea. Fucking Vince Russo, man. Fucking Russo. Thought that was a good idea how he booked Halloween Havoc 99. To confuse and piss off the fans. That was horrible booking. Russo was shit without Vince McMahon. Russo was shit as a writer or head writer or booker, head of creative. He was bad without Vince McMahon. He needed Vince. Because he did some dumb shit in wrestling. I actually could argue Russo was worse for wrestling than Jim Herd. At least Jim Herd was only around 2 or 3 years and he got fired. Russo somehow stuck around for like well over a decade. And probably because he kept conning Dixie Carter. He kept conning her, swerving her, playing her like a fool, playing her like a fiddle. Seriously, Russo kept playing Dixie Carter like year after year to keep him around, keep him as a head writer. Russo had some of the worst matches booked in TNA also that I could go through. And he absolutely did. He almost killed TNA. Him and Dixie Carter almost killed it. So yeah, there's some of the worst matches I've ever seen list. I gave you a few. There will be more in part 2 of the worst matches I've ever seen series or list. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this worst matches I've ever seen list or show. What are some of the worst matches you've ever seen? Tell me in the comments. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Bye for now.